Welcome to today's Horror Ghost Stories. Here is the story, The Man Across the Window. It was a dark, moonless night, the kind that makes the whole city feel like it's holding its breath. My desk lamp cast a lonely pool of yellow light across my notes as a podcast murmured softly in the background. I wasn't really listening. The host's voice became a blur of sound, rising and falling like waves. I was tired, unfocused, restless. That's when I noticed it, a flicker of light against my window pane. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of a passing car, but when it flashed again, steady and sharp, I looked up. Across the narrow street, another apartment glowed faintly. It was almost identical to mine, same shape, same small balcony, same half-drawn curtains that couldn't quite block the light. I leaned closer, curious. Through the thin fabric, I could make out two figures, a man and a woman, silhouetted against the pale light inside. They seemed to be arguing. The woman's hands moved quickly, her gestures sharp and desperate, while the man stood eerily still. His calmness was strange, almost rehearsed. For a second I thought he might be holding something, a metallic glint catching the light. My stomach tightened. I blinked hard, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My logical mind tried to explain it away. Maybe they were rehearsing a play. Maybe the light distorted what I saw. But something deep in my chest, the part that knows before thought, told me this was wrong. The argument grew more animated. The woman stepped closer. The man didn't move. I couldn't hear anything through the glass, but I could feel the tension like static in the air. My hand reached for my phone, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. It was as if I'd turned to stone. Then the light flickered. A shadow jerked suddenly. The woman's shape collapsed. My breath caught painfully in my throat. For a few heartbeats, I couldn't move at all. Then I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over my chair, fumbling for my phone with trembling hands. I don't remember exactly what I said to the dispatcher, only that I was crying and shaking, trying to explain that something terrible had just happened across the street. The sirens came quickly, painting the night in flashes of red and blue. I stood by the window, heart hammering, as officers entered the building opposite mine. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched thin until one of the officers came to my door to take a statement. He was calm, professional, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "You said you saw two people," he asked gently, notebook ready. I nodded, voice trembling. "A man and a woman." She fell. I couldn't finish the sentence. He glanced at his partner before replying. "We found the apartment." "The woman?" "She didn't survive. The man wasn't there when we arrived." The words made the air around me heavy, thick. I remember gripping the edge of the table just to stay upright. For the next few weeks, the story was everywhere. Local woman found dead in apartment, suspect missing. The police asked for information. I gave them everything I could remember, though the details blurred together. The man's face remained hazy in my mind, his calmness clearer than his features. I started avoiding my window at night, afraid of what I might or might not see. But silence has a way of growing inside you. Soon, the city moved on. The story faded from the headlines. The police never found him, and I never forgot 3 years passed. Life resumed its rhythm. I moved apartments, changed jobs, tried to leave that night behind. But fear has long roots. It hides under routine, waiting. This morning, I went for my usual walk through the park near my new building. The air was cool, the sun just rising over the rooftops. I almost felt peaceful. Then I heard raised voices. Ahead of me, a couple stood arguing near a coffee cart. The woman's tone was sharp, frustrated. The man, though, his stillness made my blood run cold. He wasn't angry. He was patient. Too patient. His hand rested in his jacket pocket, his head tilted just slightly, the same way I'd seen before. For a long second, the world seemed to narrow. The city noise dimmed. My heart pounded in my ears. It was him, I was sure of it. I wanted to run, to call someone, to do something, but all I could do was stare. Then he looked up. His gaze brushed over me, casual, almost uninterested, as if I were just another stranger on the street. And yet, in that moment, I felt seen. I walked away quickly, pretending nothing had happened, but every step echoed with memory.
That calm face, that stillness.
The light across the window. When I reached home, I closed my blinds tightly and turned on every light in my apartment. But even with the daylight pouring in, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, beyond some thin curtain, someone was still watching back. Next story. My encounter with a demon, pagan god. Just to start out, this is the post I made on Reddit a few years ago.
I know it sounds unbelievable, but this is what really happened.
I also have over 10 other paranormal stories I may upload later. My encounter with a demon god, I've only told about 5 people this story, but I wanted to share it with other like-minded people to try to understand this experience better. So this all took place in 2016-2017 in central GA, about 45 minutes from Macon. I've always been fascinated with the paranormal and have had countless experiences from my childhood, so I was hanging
Out with my friends when the topic comes up.
Of course, most of my other friends are very skeptical, and I suggested we go somewhere haunted. There is a local legend here about a road with 5 bridges. Ironically, it's called 3 Bridges Road to locals, and I told my friends we should check it out. We get there at about 1 a.m. and stay a couple hours. There were a few strange sounds we heard and a dark, heavy feeling, but not much else.
One of my friends claims that he saw a woman, but nobody else did, so we figured it was just his imagination. After we are done with the bridges, we go to the church that's right beside them.
Now this church is, to put it plainly, weird and creepy. It had blacked out windows, no steeple, and a small cemetery with graves that date back to the 1790s. We get a much stronger feeling here and decide to head back to my buddy's camper and chill. Fast forward a couple days, and one of my friends, Gunther, claims that he has been seeing a tar lady, as he called her, ever since we did our little ghost hunting trip. So me, trying to help him feel better, decide to cleanse his camper. Mind you, I've never done this before, so I just start saying, "Any negative entity, I command you to leave. You are not welcome here," over and over. After about 3 minutes, I feel an immense pressure and weight, like carrying a 100 lbs book bag or something. The lights start to flicker, but I keep on. My friend tells me that there are entities pointing at me, laughing and mocking.
I don't see anything, so I continue for about 10 minutes until it's too much to bear.
I run outside and start puking, and my friend tells me I have dark circles around my eyes.
I feel like I had the worst hangover in history.
I tell him I have to leave and go back home. I feel okay the next day, so we ask another friend, Rick, who didn't go with us the first time, for help. He is a pagan and is really knowledgeable on the occult and supernatural lore. We go back to the church, and he looks around for a minute and just says, "This isn't hallowed ground." We ask what he's talking about, and he says that a church should be on hallowed ground, and especially cemeteries. He implies that something weird is going on and that he suspects that the people of this church might be practicing dark arts. I'm pretty nervous at this, and me and my friend Gunther look at each other. Rick then says he can help Gunther, and they go to his camper alone. The next day I check up on Gunther, and he says he is all right now, that Rick gave him something that will protect him.
I ask what his was, and he said it's a demon lord that Rick had a contract with.
Gunther said he had to accept the demon and did. I was very skeptical and pretty much thought they were full of crap. Over the course of the next few weeks, I would be hanging out with Gunther, and his demeanor would completely change. He isn't dumb or anything, but he is simple and speaks plainly. When this thing would take over, he would speak very articulate and sophisticated. He also wouldn't say "I" when speaking about himself, he would say Gunther. So I tested this theory by asking it to prove that it was real and not just imagination gone wild or maybe split personalities. It told me a traumatic event I witnessed as a child that I damn sure didn't tell anyone because my mind tried to erase it. When it said this, I was filled with uncontrollable rage, and my other friends had to stop me from hitting him. All the while, this thing in my friend had a huge grin on its face.
After I calmed down, I asked different questions, and it confirmed it was a demon lord. It told me how Gunther's step-grandma was using witchcraft.
And about the cult at the church trying to open a portal. The only time I made it angry was when I was helping a friend, Tiffany, who had a negative entity attached to her. The demon was with us and we had 2 candles lit. I started saying a prayer over Tiffany to get the evil spirit out. She was screaming in pain and her back arched backwards in a sickening way. The demon lord was saying a chant under his breath the whole time with his eyes completely closed. After the entity was out of her, I used the opportunity to move my hand and intention to my friend Gunther, who still had his eyes closed and kept saying the same prayer. His eyes shot open immediately, and the look he had was pure hatred. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't fuck with me," then grabbed both candles and blew them out simultaneously. I have a lot of other stories about this demon lord and of other unrelated paranormal experiences, but this is the one that will always be the creepiest. Let me know if you guys would like to hear more. Next story. The creature in sheep clothing. Good evening.
Everyone, this story will be slightly longer.
It took me a while to get the details together, and another while to muster the courage to write it down. I've already told you about what I thought was my first encounter with that dogman-like creature, the one that tried to play with me when I was 11. A few weeks ago, when I went home to visit my family, I asked my grandmother if she remembered anything about it. I would have liked my grandfather to be there too, but he passed away. With him went his half of this story. I told her I had sent the story to someone on the internet who narrates such things. I would have explained the strange modern phenomenon of people finding comfort in listening to horror stories and unexplained encounters. But she's 80. She's seen enough of the world already. She laughed at first.
I thought she was laughing at me, mocking me to enjoy something so absurd.
You must always expect a certain savagery from a Balkan woman. Then she spoke. Of everything that happened, you decided to write about that?
I froze. What do you mean?
There is only one thing in this world that truly frightens me. Werewolves, dogmen, hellhounds, whatever name you choose to give them. That night is why.
My grandmother knows that.
Everyone I know knows that. At some point you stopped going back to the woods, she said. You never went again, even though it used to be your favorite thing in the world. You stopped playing with your friends by the sheepfold. You moved back in with your parents a year earlier than you should have, and both your Tata and I accepted it.
All because of that day. How can you not remember? Something inside my head caught fire.
The room spun.
I wanted to vomit. I couldn't keep my balance.
My body went weak, and I collapsed onto her bed. The walls were shrinking around me, closing like a fist. My heart was a drum beneath my ribs, too loud, too fast. I couldn't breathe. No matter how I tried, the air refused to go where it was meant to. My grandmother caught me and pulled me into her lap. She opened the iron gate of the fireplace, drew out a glowing ember, and dropped it into a glass of water. Then she dipped 3 fingers into the water and began to anoint my forehead and face. Her voice trembled into a whisper, old words spilling from her memory.
An incantation against the evil eye. S-o luat Maria pa cărare.
Pe drumul cel mare s-a întâlnit cu deochetor, cu deochetoare, cu moroi, cu moroaie, cu strigoi, cu strigoaie, fugi de ochi dintre ochi. Marie să rămână curată, luminată, ca argint strecurat. I tried to add a rough translation of what the chant means, but I'm not sure it will pass the language barrier. Maria took to the path. Down the great road she met the one who casts with eyes, and those who curse with sight, the restless dead and the whispering shades. Flee? Affliction flee from her eyes, let Maria remain pure, illuminated, like silver poured through light. After she finished, it was as though the fog inside my mind had lifted, thinned out until only silence remained. Once I could think clearly again, I decided to send this story as well. For years, I believed it had been nothing more than a nightmare, some invention of a restless mind steeped in books and ghost stories. But it was not. I have always loved nature. My grandparents owned so much land that nearly every patch of soil surrounding the forest belonged to them. Since I was 4, my ma and ta would take me there, every season except winter, to gather mushrooms. In winter, we went only once to cut a Christmas tree. The mushrooms, called giba, served as a meat substitute in many dishes, but most often appeared in zakuska, a vegetable preserve we ate throughout the cold months. We relied on such jars to endure the long Romanian winters. Gathering kibi was no pastime. It was tradition, necessity, almost ritual. As the years passed and my grandparents grew frail, I began venturing into the woods alone.
I knew where the ranger station was. I knew the paths, the trees that could be climbed, the routes that must not be taken.
The forest was never empty. I would meet neighbors, old friends of my grandfather, passing travelers, and my favorite of all, the herd of sheep. Every spring, a stinky rich man from the neighboring village would send his 3 shepherds to establish a camp near the forest's edge. They came with nearly 400 sheep and 10 sheepdogs. Each day, the shepherds drove the flock through the woods, stopping at clearings where the grass grew thick and letting the girls eat. I would sometimes meet them during my walks. I always greeted the shepherds, 2 boys I had once gone to kindergarten with before they left school to work, and the village drunkard, whom we'll call Sam. We used to play together as children, so we still enjoyed each other's company then. They would show me the lambs, tiny and unsteady, and once they even let me name one and mark her as my own. She was baby number 19. They laughed and said she looked like me, so we named her Maruta. It means ladybug. It was the nickname my grandfather had given me, and it had clung to me ever since. As the years passed, I saw less and less of the boys. They left the village chasing better work, but Sam remained. He drifted from job to job through the seasons, yet whenever the sheep were sent to our forest, he was always one of the shepherds. The year this happened, he was the only one. Because of that, he only took the flock down to the forest in the morning and brought them back by noon. His employer allowed it. It would have been too exhausting to herd alone from dawn to dusk. One lovely autumn day, I went on my usual walk. I wasn't gathering mushrooms or berries, just wandering, breathing in the scent of leaves and damp soil, eating the snack Grandma had packed, and planning to head home after.
I was never afraid here. I knew the woods and the woods knew me.
Plus, it was the middle of the day. I was kicking through the leaves when I noticed something pale among the orange carpet ahead of me.
As I drew closer, I saw it was a sheep lying on its side, facing away.
I got even closer and saw it. There was a tag on its ear, AA 2020-1919, my sheep. My ladybug tie started to walk faster. Thoughts raced through me. Poor thing. She must have been left behind, lost, frightened. I'll bring her back, I thought. I can tie her with my belt, lead her home, and keep her safe. But as I approached, I noticed the red. It was subtle at first, just a stain on the wool, but then it spread. There was red in the leaves, red around her body, streaks on the bark. Torn wool clung to branches, scraps of flesh tangled in roots. My first thought was that a wild dog had attacked the flock, or maybe a fox.
A wolf even, and she was left behind.
My hands trembled. My breath grew shallow.
I told myself I couldn't leave her there. She'll die if I do, I whispered.
She's mine.
I can't let her die. Then I realized that she wasn't moving.
Not even a twitch, not even a tremor, though my steps were loud.
My steps loud? My steps were the only sound in that forest then. What in the world? I muttered.
But I kept walking. I was 17. Courage and stupidity wore the same face at that age. The closer I came, the worse it became. The trees bore long, jagged scratches 4 or 5 meters high. The trunks were dark with something that looked like blood. Branches were splintered, as though something massive had forced its way through and caught on the rough bark, strands of fur, black fur. All the shepherd dogs were white. I was 1/2 meter away when I called her name. Ladybug?
That's when I heard it.
Behind me, la-la-la-la-dee-dee-die.
Big! My stomach dropped.
I turned so fast the world blurred. Nothing, just trees. Just stillness and silence. Then I faced forward again. Ladybug was starting to stand. I smiled. She rose unsteady at first, back to me. But she kept rising. Taller, higher. The wool shifted. It wasn't wool anymore. It was splitting, giving way to something black, something alive beneath it. It straightened fully, and the forest seemed to fold around it. The creature stood there, immense, easily 3.5 meters tall, shoulders wide enough to crush the air around them. Its fur was black and coarse, glinting where sunlight pierced the canopy. Its head was that of a wolf, but distorted, and way too deliberate in its movements. When it exhaled, the sound was thick, wet, and the smell that followed made my stomach turn. Rot, damp fur, iron, and something else, something sickly sweet like liquor. It tilted its head at me. The eyes were not glowing. They were pale, the color of fog on bone.
Thinking eyes, watching eyes, understanding eyes, and it was wearing Ladybug on its head. It moved forward with dreadful precision, each step soundless.
When it crouched, its long arms brushed the ground, claws like hooked knives gouging the soil. The muscles along its arms shifted under the fur, dense, deliberate.
And then it smiled.
The mouth stretched too far, the gums black and red, the teeth uneven and human-like, though sharper, jagged, wrong. It looked pleased.
Ladybug.
The voice wasn't imitation. It was speech, fractured, learned, as if it remembered the word from a dream I couldn't move.
My body no longer belonged to me.
My heartbeat thundered in my ears, so loud I was certain it could hear it too. It crouched, lowering itself until its face was level with mine, its snout so close I could feel the damp air trembling between us.
I saw everything.
The way the fur thinned around its eyes, where pale skin peeked through like scars. The thick pearls of drool gathering between its teeth, glistening red in the corners of its mouth. I wanted to run.
I wanted to vanish, to die before it could do to me something worse than death itself. It didn't attack.
It only watched, unblinking with that strange, deliberate intelligence. Then, with a sound like air being sucked from the room, it exhaled sharply and raised one of its long, grotesque arms. The movement was precise, almost graceful.
Its claw extended, long, black, and impossibly thin, and pointed toward my mouth. I didn't dare blink. I knew that if I did, it would end me. Ladybug's blood was dripping from its fur, landing hot on my forehead, tracing a path down my cheek.
The creature's claw pressed gently against the corner of my lips. The touch was slow, and needles sting.
A thin line of blood welled and began to slide down my chin, streaking crimson across my knees. Drool spilled from its mouth as it spoke again. I know you. The sound was unbearable. Its voice was shattered, like something trying to speak through crushed bone and torn flesh. It lingered for one breath longer, one breath too long, and then it dropped its arm.
The edge of its claw slicing my mouth as it fell. Without another sound, it leapt upward, impossibly fast, tearing through the canopy with monstrous ease, vanishing from branch to branch. The forest shuddered, then fell silent once more. Something hit the ground beside me with a soft, final thud, a little yellow tag. A 2020 or 19 Ladybug's tag. I don't know how I walked home that day, how my legs carried me through the mud and bramble,
how I changed my clothes, how I disinfected the wound that still pulsed under my skin as if it had its own heartbeat.
How I washed Ladybug's tag until the yellow shone again, then tucked it between my socks in a drawer like something sacred or cursed. I don't remember how I slept, only that I did. For days, maybe weeks, I dreamed of trees that breathed, of eyes behind bark, of a voice that stuttered through my walls. And then one morning, I woke up and I was well.
I still cannot understand how it all came together. How I forgot.
But Ma knew how I forgot, but I never stepped into that forest again. How I forgot. But I moved back with my parents, far from those woods, far from the sound of branches cracking at night. How I forgot my scar. So they decided to make up something simpler. They said the scar came from falling down the stairs while holding an umbrella, that I'd cut myself clean across the corner of the lips. It was easier that way. One evening, long after, I asked my grandmother, what happened to Ladybug's tag?
To my clothes?
The ones that were stained? She sighed, her hands stilled on the table, her eyes half closed as if the question itself had weight. We burned it all. You had to forget, she said softly. And if you forgot, it would forget you too, eventually. Then she paused, just long enough for the silence to settle like dust. We traded calves, she added.
And goats, and ducks and geese.
Everything but not you. One day Yatata left home in the morning to visit the sheepfold and came home later in the night. He told me to forget everything that ever happened and make sure you don't remember either. He told me to say nothing when you move far away, but you did not.
You just told me everything.
I yelled. My mind scrambled. Nothing made sense anymore. She sighed slowly this time. I could feel her patience thinning. About a half year after your tar passed, she said, her voice low and measured. The forester responsible for this side of the forest came over for a drink.
I fed him, gave him wine, and we began to talk.
They tore down the sheepfold. Every silo, every shed, every enclosure. More than 100 sheep were slaughtered, the rest scattered across the forest. I couldn't believe it.
A bear? A wolf pack?
Something else entirely? When they found it, they searched the entire estate, she continued. Sam was dead in one of the sheds, collapsed on the floor. It was bound to happen at some point, I muttered, thinking of his drinking, the cigarettes. He bled out, Grandma interrupted, her voice calm, almost clinical. No other lesions, no other pathologies.
His body was completely drained of blood. I tried to absorb it.
I tried to make sense of it. My thoughts stumbled and fell apart. His body had begun decomposition, she said. At the time they said he must have been dead for over 8 months. I listened as long as I could. But she stopped. We talked some more about other, less terrifying things. Then I left. Later, in the quiet of my own home, I thought about it again. 8 months. That meant he had been dead the day I found Ladybug. He had been dead the week before, the month before, and yet the sheep were herded every day.
And yet I had met him on my walks.
I met him every day except the day I found Ladybug. The thought lingered like a shadow at the edges of the room, impossible, incomprehensible, and entirely real. This whole mess just made me think, what else had I forgotten? Next story, the cursed forest farm of my uncle's home. I moved to Texas shortly after these events unfolded. But I left with a warning for anyone and all who might stumble upon that secluded land. If you ever enter a property full of trees that is eerily quiet, look everywhere, especially in the trees. You will not be alone. Those hellhounds are out there, watching, and they will get you if you are not fast enough or smart enough to survive them. For most of my youth, my uncle, John, was my favorite hero, a man that I lived with. Between my ages of 8 to 14, he lived simply on a land of 350-acre forest property with holding at a variety assortment of trees, different ages, different heights, most of them being around 30 to 20 feet high. Some trees were darker, some trees were lighter, and none of them were perfect. Looking trees, they were quite odd looking, but in peaceful coexistence, with a neighbor who owned another 220 acres. Most of his trees were oak trees. He took me hunting and taught me valuable life lessons. My uncle and the neighbor gave me a nickname, Shaw, a play on Shadow because I was a quiet kid and was a very good person at popping up behind people and scaring them. His house maintaining held his wife, a menagerie of 7 dogs, 2 wolves and a few boxer hounds, and then a couple of ewe animals, terrifying and dangerous animals for my uncle, like tigers, lions, jaguars and a couple of other. And for his wife, Cute, cuddly small creatures, rabbits, ferrets and a couple zebras and horses. The true oddity began when we got a new puppy.
As it aged, it transformed.
It became larger, angrier and more aggressive, with a skull-like head and an emaciated appearance despite eating voraciously. This transformation was infectious. Soon, all the dogs adopted this hellish look.
I grew up around them, so it wasn't scary to me.
But the situation was far from normal. My uncle, I discovered, had trained these hellhounds to protect a specific 160-acre parcel of land within his and his neighbor's properties, a facility surrounded by a reinforced opaque fence. His single inviolable rule for me was to never approach the gate. Only he and his lead hellhound were permitted to enter, staying inside for hours. In a chilling routine, an ear-splitting alarm would sound an hour or 2 after he exited the gates, as if some large creature was being released. The property's other mystery was the presence of a few unusual visitors. Only 2 people ever entered without being hunted by the hellhounds, a man and a woman, both emotionally dead, their faces devoid of expression. They initially believed the area was a forest reserve. I titled the man the Grey Man due to his 6.2 frame, black hair, grey skin, and cold, dead eyes. His presence was deeply unsettling, making me feel as if I was not standing before a human being. He and my uncle had yearly private conversations that ceased the moment I approached. My uncle was a good judge of character, but this man made me question everything I knew. I still don't know whether to be scared or terrified that I ever met him. And I never did figure out what was inside that facility, but I always did hear sounds coming from within the walls when I was ever closer, banging, slamming and normal sounds, but mostly the sound of whistling in a cold, steady rhythm like how some hunters would whistle when trying to pass time, the whistle of hunting prey if you're a hunter. You know what I mean? We all have done it and we all enjoy it. Next story. Haunting on Liberty Street. Chapter 1. Love of alcohol laid its dark foundations in my family many years before my birth. My great-grandfather Al, an immigrant from Quebec, Canada, who served in WW1, first turned to alcohol not for its physical effects, but out of necessity to provide for his family and survival. Desperate to provide for his family, he turned to rum running during Prohibition. He leveraged his contacts in Quebec, distributing alcohol all along the East Coast to thirsty patrons who were eager to spend their money on such a hard-to-find commodity. Al was a resourceful and determined man, driven by the need to provide for his family despite the legal and moral risks involved in rum running. Despite the temporary profits of his running, the stress of the inherited risks of running, along with the demands of providing for his family, led to the beginning of his consuming his product. His alcohol use slowly tore apart the fabric of his family, unraveling relationships and leaving them fragmented and broken. The stress from these turbulent times had lasting effects, altering his descendants' genes and impacting the mental health of future generations. A legacy of trauma passed down from parent to child. My father inherited his deep love for alcohol from these generations before him, draining our meager savings, plunging us into financial ruin. As a child, I watched helplessly as my father's addiction consumed our lives, witnessing firsthand the fears and uncertainties that come with addiction. This marked the beginning of a series of events that forced me to prioritize my own survival above all else, not out of ambition, but out of sheer necessity. Chapter 2. Background. Let's go back to the beginning. Nestled between Boston and Providence is the small town of East Taunton, a section of Taunton, Massachusetts, where 5 generations of my father's family laid their roots, within the boundaries of the infamous Bridgewater Triangle. The house they lived in was built around the start of the 20th century and owned by a man named George and his sister Louisa. After WWI, my great-grandparents immigrated from Quebec, Canada to the United States, like so many others who were seeking a better life in America. They found themselves in Taunton, with little money, looking for a place to rent and start their family, when they came across a farmhouse on Liberty Street. My great-grandmother Ginny worked in factories in hopes of providing for her ever-growing family. Their first child was born in 1921, having 5 more children in succession. With Ginny working in the factories and mothering the children, my great-grandfather Al began to use his Canadian connections to begin his rum running at the beginning of Prohibition. His illegal business went on right until the end of Prohibition in 1930. Without the need of illegal alcohol anymore, Al was forced to find a way to make an honest living. This was the beginning of the Great Depression, and to help in their struggle to pay rent, my great-grandparents Ginny and Al became the caretakers of the Liberty Street house they've been raising their family in. This helped with relieving the burden of maintaining the home from the aging homeowners, George and Louisa, while also helping to lower Ginny and Al's cost of rent. Eventually, my grandparents took ownership of the home after George's death in the early 1930s, though this was during the Great Depression, a challenging time for everyone. Ginny and Al were kind people and opened their home to many transients passing through southeast New England. They would give those in need a roof over their heads and a warm meal to eat. This whole time, however, Al was still battling his addiction with alcohol, putting added stress on his family in an already very tenuous time. Along with Al's personal battles, many of the travelers they opened their home to had struggles of their own, adding temptations to his already vulnerable state. As the years passed and Ginny and Al's family grew larger, they turned the boarding house into their private home. Still struggling with alcohol use, Al did the best he could. According to my surviving aunts, it was a simple life with strong family ties, always making time to be together for family meals. Ginny and Al's children all moved out of the Liberty Street house, but some grandchildren remained. Al passed away in 1978, leaving his wife, 4 of his grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild living together in the Liberty Street house. Years passed and Ginny lived on the first floor with my uncle, his wife, and their 2 children. Upstairs were my parents, my brother, and myself. Ginny never got over the heartbreak of the death of her husband, died in 1985 in a hospital. After Ginny's death, one of her sons, my grandfather, began construction on the property, building another home which was connected to the original by a singular roof that remains to this day. We think this construction and the altering of the original Liberty Street home is why the following events took place. Chapter 3. Paranormal Parasite, Almost. Immediately after the alterations of the original home began, so did the paranormal activity. At first, it was only innocuous with whispered words and misplaced items. My brother would hear a voice telling him to finish his mashed potatoes as he got up from the dinner table, a seemingly harmless instruction. Oftentimes, a ceramic green frog that held Brillo pads would go missing. My mother would search everywhere for the frog, only to find it mysteriously back in its place after months of absence. This would continue to happen every few months. At first glance, all these odd things could be explained away by human logic, an absence of mind due to daily activities or distractions, an inner conscience telling you to do the right thing. However, after several instances of these happenings, we were provided with the proof that it was not normal everyday events. At first glance, we hoped that it was our recently deceased grandmother who was responsible for these light-hearted events. However, other events began to happen that defied explanation, leaving us bewildered and uneasy. One such instance was a time when my 5-year-old self, my mother, our 90lb dog, Buggy, my 10-year-old brother, and his friend were sitting on my brother's bed, listening to music and talking. The mood in the room suddenly shifted, and the entire bed, with us on it, raised a foot off the floor and began to violently shake. At the time, as a 5-year-old, the immensity of this event did not cross my mind, but as years passed, I began to realize this was not a normal thing to happen. To this day, I cannot think of a plausible explanation for how my family could have rationalized the event, but it was not spoken of again until we moved out of that house 5 years later. Chapter 4: Friendly Ghost. As a child under the age of 7, I lived in a world of make-believe, never questioning my reality. Casper the Friendly Ghost was one of my favorite TV shows, and like many children, I believed in ghosts and that they all were indeed friendly. But the entity in our home was far from it. Once construction began on the property in the mid-1980s, the paranormal activity intensified. This was a time when kids played outside until the streetlights came on. When the time came to come in for the night, I would run up the stairs to our apartment in the home. I would always thank my friendly ghost for opening the door for me, it swinging open as if by magic. If the door didn't open immediately, I would only have to wait a moment for this ghost to accommodate my entry. Any delay from my friendly ghost would bring me a sense of impatience and almost betrayal,
as if my invisible friend had let me down. Chapter 5: A tortured tale by the mid to late 1980s.
The paranormal activity worsened significantly. Another area of our home,
ominously dubbed the portal to hell, was a back closet near my parents' bedroom.
Despite the house's age and need for insulation, this closet's temperature would inexplicably drop 15-20 degrees from the rest of the house, regardless of the season. To make the apartment more of a home for us, my family painted all the rooms, an attempt at making it our own. In this closet, however, paint would never dry, always keeping wet and running. Many attempts at cleaning and repainting this closet were always met in vain. Ultimately, my family gave up any attempt of painting these walls, and it remained a patch of bare, cold drywall that seemed to breathe a frigid sigh into the entire room. Periodically, drops of what we thought were water would drip down from the ceiling, their source and reason remaining a mystery due to the lack of pipes in the ceiling. The mysterious water drops became a terrifying nightly ritual. They would fall onto my parents' bed, always in the same spot above my mother's side. It wasn't water. It was a thick, viscous, blood-like fluid that smelled faintly metallic. We tried everything, checking the roof, looking for unknown pipes or anything that could give an explanation to the source of these drips. There was no physical source. The entity in the house was making a statement, and the message was clear. Its presence was not a game nor welcoming. This shift from light-hearted mischief to a targeted, menacing haunting changed the atmosphere of our home from merely odd to overtly hostile. My mother became withdrawn, my father's drinking escalated, and the sense of safety we once had quickly evaporated. The friendly ghost of my childhood stares had revealed its true malicious nature. It wasn't Casper. It was a parasite, feeding on the very fear and trauma that our family legacy had so carefully cultivated over the generations. The house, once a sanctuary for transients, was now a prison for us. As construction progressed, the entity's presence grew increasingly malicious, culminating in a disturbing incident with our dog. One evening, we returned home to find our dog Sasha crouching in the corner of the room, shaking uncontrollably. Her behavior indicated severe distress. Sasha, an American Eskimo with a furry, white twisted tail similar to a pig's or a corkscrew, had a huge portion of the fur on it missing. Being so young, I did not understand the situation, but I do remember the feeling in our home that night, as if the energy was sucked out of the room and was replaced with a sense of darkness.
Every part of our apartment was searched, including the trash.
But my mother never did find the rest of our dog's tail. Chapter 6. Jesus Christ has left the room. Growing up, I was a shy kid, typically found trying to hang off my mother for support. We lived in poverty, consisting mainly of Portuguese immigrants in a tight-knit community. I was mostly surrounded by males in my family and neighborhood, aside from one much younger girl who lived next door. My first best friend, which for the sake of this story we will call Christian, was as painfully shy as I, but we instantly hit it off. We were introduced in the early 1980s and remained close until he moved from the area with his mum. Our play was typically male-based, meaning that we enjoyed Christian's toys such as Transformers action toys and wooden blocks. Our mothers would leave us be, as we would spend all day completely content with each other. One beautiful fall afternoon, Christian and I were playing in my bedroom quietly until we were interrupted by my mother. As my bedroom door flew open, the look on my mother's face was something that my young self had yet to see, a sense of anger that I did not know the source of. As the color slowly started to come across her face, she was adamant that Christian and I were in serious trouble for what we had done. Perplexed, we only looked at each other with confusion as my mother attempted to make sense of what she had just witnessed. There was a metal crucifix that hung above my parents' bed, which had previously belonged to Ginny. The cross had been in the same location for as long as I could remember, being a sign of faith and security.
That is until this one beautiful fall afternoon.
This cross had slowly began to sway back and forth on the wall, each time in quicker succession, back and forth, gathering momentum with each stride, until finally falling from its nail, landing upside down with the body of Jesus facing the wall in a sick defiance to its meaning, not understanding what she had just witnessed, and
Us being the only three people.
in the home at the time, my mother could only think to blame Christian, and I somehow for what had just transpired. Chapter 7. The Inheritance. The house on Liberty Street wasn't just built on land. It was built on a foundation of generational trauma. The stress of Al's rum running, the desperation that came with the Great Depression, the quiet suffering of my great-grandmother Ginny, all of it seeped into the very beams of that house. We were living in a structure saturated with fear, anxiety, and loss. It felt less like a haunting and more like an emotional ecology. The entity, whatever it was, hadn't brought this negativity and fear with it. It simply harvested what was already there and cultivated its growth. After the death of Al, my father's addiction became the fertile ground the parasite needed to thrive. When the drop ceiling started to bleed above my mother's head, it felt less like a random act of a lost ghost and more like the house's soul was weeping for the broken promises of the men who lived in and altered it. I began to see parallels. The way the entity mimicked a friendly helper, like my friendly ghost, opening the door, had mirrored the way had alcohol promises relief, but delivered ruin. Both were parasites wearing a friendly mask. We were trapped in a cycle, reliving the same anxieties that had plagued Al during Prohibition. The difference was he was running from the law. We were running from a haunting entity, an entity that had nowhere to hide except for inside our home and inside our minds. This horror was drilling its way into our very being. Chapter 8. Boiled over. One night, my mother awoke in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, fumbling through our apartment as she walked from her bedroom to the bathroom. As she finished, she exited the bathroom, now more awake than when entering. She began to make her way back to her bedroom when a male appeared before her. At the time, she had thought it was my father and reached for him for an embrace. My mother placed her hands at what she had thought was my father's waist, but instead her hands went right through the entity. My mother's account of this night have never wavered, nor were any details changed with time. Growing up, my mother was typically running the house as my father was usually out with friends or asleep during the day due to his night shift job. I distinctly remember one afternoon where my mother was making macaroni and cheese for lunch. Watching my mother in our dining room from my bedroom doorway, we chatted about our day as the water slowly came to a boil. In an instant, the full pot of boiling water flew across the room with an unimaginable force, slamming into the wall on the other side of the room, sending scalding hot water everywhere. My mother and I remained frozen in place, unsure what had just transpired, not able to make sense of it. Oddly enough, life continued without word of these events to anyone, just my mother and I as witnesses. Chapter 9. Wishing for sleep nighttime was always the worst. Even now, over 30 years later, the house still haunts mine and my brother's dreams. You may say that I suffered from sleep paralysis.
I still wrestle with this label.
It was not in my dreams, but a waking nightmare. Being fully awake, wishing for sleep, more often than not, I would feel this indescribable weight on my chest. My tiny body could not move with such a force pressing down onto it, unable to move and frozen in place. Attempting to scream for my mother's help was futile. I could feel my mouth move, but no sound would emerge. The breath literally taken from me. I have never since felt such a feeling of foreboding. Another night, I was lying in bed when a fully formed woman appeared at the foot of my bed, wearing all white with long dark hair. I was again paralyzed with the weight and even more fear, only wanting my mother so badly, yet unable to even whimper. Then the woman spoke. "Jenny, come here," not demanding.
Not threatening.
But pleading. "Jenny, come here," she continued. "Jenny, come here." Was she trying to scare me?
Was she trying to show me something?
Summoning me with her hands in a forward motion to come towards her, her face filled with an overwhelming sadness. She stood there motionless before me except for those hands beckoning me to come to her. Where? I will never know, and for the most part, relieved that I did not follow her cues. Or was it gestures? The next morning, I awoke with a profound sense of melancholy, a weight that lingered long after the night faded. This feeling wasn't about solving a mystery or uncovering a hidden past. It was about the enduring echo of pain, a sorrow so deep it had seeped into the very fabric of the place. A haunting not just in our sleep, but the waking hours as well. The only logical explanation to me was that it must have been one of my aunts calling for me. For why else would there be a woman in my room? Repeatedly I questioned my mother about the events of the previous night, but she could offer no answer. We had no visitors that night, nor any expected. Nothing to explain what I experienced, nor able to provide any comfort to my kid brain, only a no response that still lingers to this day. Jenny,
come here. Those 3 words continue to echo in my mind to this day.
Triggering memories of these events in full detail, still haunting and chilling me to the core. Over 30 years later. Conclusion. Fast forward 22 years later, when after purchasing my first home, I decided to research its origins. This instead led me to looking into the house on Liberty Street. The town census was explored, and to my surprise, the internet did not disappoint. Within minutes, I excitedly found my great-grandparents' names along with ages and occupations. To my shock, I also found a name with the words witch next to it. I had heard stories of the Witch of Taunton, Massachusetts, as a child. She would be seen and heard in the woods of East Taunton on occasions only to disappear without a trace if you tried to follow. A roaring fire could be seen through the trees, only to have no evidence of it ever existing. Piercing screams heard. The name that had witch scribed next to it was the name Louisa Lovegood, and it was she and her brother George who had sold the Liberty Street house to my great-grandparents. The witch had a name, and it was more closely tied to my family than I had wanted. I was in utter shock and disbelief, a silent acknowledgement of something lost and irretrievable within the very foundations of that old house. Was she the friendly ghost? The hater of the crucifix? The visitor beckoning me to follow? How does one gain the title of witch? And how is it that my family happened upon their home? Perhaps she wasn't wanting to be found, but simply longing to be remembered.
And maybe in sharing our story, we finally have.
Next story, Skinwalker. So this just happened about 3 hours ago. Me and my girlfriend were coming home from her grandparents'
house, and they live in the country, and they have their own land. So we were driving on the main road and I'm taking this corner and I look.
Over in the passenger side seat to talk to her, and up on this hill, there was one single tree about 9-ish feet tall.
And as we pass it, I audibly yell, "What the fuck?"
Was that and standing by that tree was at least a 7 or 8 feet tall silhouette that had white, glowing eyes looking back, and you could see the outline of horns going up to the top of the tree.
And she looks at me and looks back and said, "Didn't say that you're scaring me."
And we have to go down this creepy dirt road to come back into town. And as we're going, all I kept seeing was shadows either just standing or darting from side to side of the road.
And out of nowhere, my sun visor light turns on, even though the visor has never worked, and it's on for about 5-ish. Minutes before it just shuts off, and right as we get
towards where the concert and dirt meet,
look in my mirror on my driver's side, and I swear I could see some figure keeping up with my truck, and I was
cooking a nice 65 met on that dirt road. It looked like its arm or hand was on my dually fender. I could see the dark silhouette of an arm. So we hightail out of the dirt road, and we hit the concert, and we cruise a good 75 back into town. We both agree that we need to go somewhere where there
are more people escape. We stop and collect ourselves at Walmart of all places. And I get out to check my fender, and my fender is really dusty, and there was this one spot that you
could tell something was against it because there was still dust, but not as much as there should have been. It looked like an arm wiped all the dust off. Now, it could have been me just seeing things, and I freaked my girlfriend out, and she went along with it, especially because it's Halloween, but I've been raised in the Apalchian Mountains before I moved out here in Wyoming, so I can tell when there is a deer or a
regular animal and when JT is something you just can't explain.
Now, this wasn't my first encounter with something mysterious. About 4-ish years ago, when I was about 13 or 14, I was squirrel hunting up in the property that my grandfather owned in the Appalachian. I had my dog with me named Spartan, and we were right up around the top of a holler, either little creek, and I was looking straight in front of me and out of the corner of my eye to the left.
I see movement I could have sworn. I saw what looked like a black, 4-legged thing, like a black bear or something walking. And I turn to the right, and then I quickly double take back.
And I see what looks to be a man just out of nowhere. And my dog cowers, and normally he didn't cower with people. Granted, he didn't like people, but he didn't never cowered from them.
And he went between my legs and started shaking like he was scared.
And the guy or thing just kept walking. I tried to ask him if he got anything or seen anything, but all I got was silence. His footsteps had no sound, and he definitely should have made sound. It was the middle of winter in Pennsylvania. There was snow on the ground.
I couldn't hear any snow crunching. In fact, I couldn't hear a thing.
The woods were silent.
He never even looked in my direction.
I remember thinking it was weird, but I just shrugged it off as some hunter who didn't want to talk. But after this incident tonight, I remembered this story and how weird I thought it was, and started thinking maybe it was a hunter, maybe it wasn't even a man. I have one more story, and this wasn't long after the squirrel hunting story. So it was around midnight or so, and it was just me. And my grandma sitting in our house had 4 acres of land, and then we were surrounded by just woods in Eastbourne down the hill. So we're sitting in there, and we could hear what sounded like tapping on the metal of the bar. We let it go on for a little bit.
As we just assumed it was just the wind.
So I went out there to investigate.
And I took my dog with me. I grabbed my BB gun and I grabbed this really old flashlight.
It was a Coleman green flashlight that just went in one straight beam. So I get to the edge of the house, and I'm shinning the beam down at the shed, and I'm just looking up and down and side to side, and I can't really see anything.
But then I start scanning up the wall, and looking back at me was a set of whitish eyes. And even with the flashlight sucking, I could see the silhouette of like hands to hands.
Grabbing the side of the barn and
peeking out like a kid playing hide and seek. And me being a dumb teenager, I figured it was just a squirrel or a raccoon, so I picked my BB gun up and I shoot at it, and I must have hit it because
it let out this ungodly scream, screech, howl thing that I've never heard anything like JT. And me and my dog take off, running back into the house. I slam the door open, startling my grandma, and I tell her what happened, and she just tells me to lock the door and stay inside. So fast forward about an hour or so, I start hearing our chickens screeching and screaming like something was in their pen. And at that point, I had an egg business, and I was not going to let this thing eat my chickens. So I go to the gun cabinet.
I pull out a 30-30 and I go back out.
I take the flashlight, I shine it back down to the barn, and I can't see anything. So I'm scanning, and I scanned to the wood line, and there something was deeping, same thing, peeking behind a tree this time though.
And it had to have been taller than 8 feet or so. And then while this is all happening,
My grandma was inside, and she told me this later when I got up there. She looked outside, and our porch hung about 7 feet. It had an automatic light that turned on with movement, and it was off because I was outside for a long time at this point.
and she said it turned on and she looked out thinking it was
Me, and she saw a black shadow that was taller than our.
roof go past it in my direction, and I wasn't aware that there was something behind me as well. So
I'm looking at this thing at the tree. It's not necessarily acting as a threat, more of a curious look. So I pick the 30-30 up and I shoot past it twice, purposefully missing to see what it does. It doesn't even blink, doesn't even move, and 30-30s are a pretty big round for an animal.
then all of a sudden it makes a low growl snarl sound, and I Aegean hightail back up to the house. The next day I go down to where I saw all of this, and I go to
The shed. And there is this specific,
eye hook that we place about 8 feet up the wall.
and this thing's hands were right on JTL. So this thing have been taller than 8 feet that sent shivers down my spine, and I'm going around, and it was the middle of winter again, and there was just like an area we had that was completely froze over where I could drive a four-wheeler over it and not crack it, and it was completely broken. Just ice everywhere, chunks like a footprint. And I tell my uncle what happened.
Because he lives right down the road from us, and he said he
Got home that night, late at night, because he is a truck driver and worked late, and it was right after we butchered, and we had a gut pile where we put all of the gods and scraps of the animals and just let like the
coyotes and stuff eat it, and he heard something down there, and he went down there.
to investigate, and he could hear something walking over his footsteps. And now he was like 340 pounds. At this point, he's a big guy, and he had his gun with him, and he shot in the air, and he said that just made it sound like it was getting closer.
I don't know if what I saw all those times were just a shadow or a normal person, but I'm genuinely concerned of being tracked by a skinwalker.
Next story, my encounter with a demon to pagan god. Just to start out, this is the post I made on Reddit a few years ago. I know it sounds unbelievable, but this is what really happened. I also have over 10 other paranormal stories I may upload later. My encounter with a demon god, I've only told about 5 people this story, but wanted to share it with other like-minded people to try to understand this experience better. So this all took place in 2016-2017 in central GA, about 45 minutes from Macon. I've always been fascinated with the paranormal and have had countless experiences from my childhood. So I was hanging out with my friends when the topic comes up. Of course, most of my other friends are very skeptical, and I suggested we go somewhere haunted. There is a local legend here about a road with 5 bridges. Ironically, it's called 3 Bridges Road to locals, and I told my friends we should check it out. We get there at about 1 a.m. and stay a couple hours. There were a few strange sounds we heard and a dark, heavy feeling, but not much else.
One of my friends claims that he saw a woman, but nobody else did, so we figured it was just his imagination. After we are done with the bridges, we go to the church that's right beside them. Now this church is, to put it plainly, weird and creepy.
It had blacked out windows, no steeple, and a small cemetery with graves that date back to the 1790s. We get a much stronger feeling here and decide to head back to my buddy's camper and chill. Fast forward a couple days, and one of my friends, Gunther, claims that he has been seeing a tar lady, as he called her, ever since we did our little ghost hunting trip. So me, trying to help him feel better, decide to cleanse his camper. Mind you, I've never done this before. So I just start saying, any negative entity, I command you to leave. You are not welcome here. Over and over. After about 3 minutes, I feel
an immense pressure and weight, like carrying a 100 lbs book bag or something.
the lights start to flicker, but I keep on. My friend tells me that there are entities pointing at me, laughing and mocking. I don't see anything, so I continue for about 10 minutes until it's too much to bear. I run outside and start puking, and my friend tells me I have dark circles around my eyes. I feel like I had the worst hangover in history. I tell him I have to leave and go back home. I feel okay the next day, so we ask another friend, Rick, who didn't go with us the first time, for help. He is a pagan and is really knowledgeable on the occult and supernatural lore. We go back to the church, and he looks around for a minute and just says, "Wudu, this isn't hallowed ground." We ask what he is talking about, and he says that a church should be on hallowed ground, and especially cemeteries. He implies that something weird is going on and that he suspects that the people of this church might be practicing dark arts. I'm pretty nervous at this, and me and my friend Gunther look at each other. Rick then says he can help Gunther, and they go to his camper alone. The next day I check up on Gunther, and he says he is all right now, that Rick gave him something that will protect him. I ask what his was, and he said it's a demon lord that Rick had a contract with. Gunther said he had to accept the demon, and did. I was very skeptical, and pretty much thought they were full of crap. Over the course of the next few weeks, I would be hanging out with Gunther, and his demeanor would completely change. He isn't dumb or anything, but he is simple and speaks plainly. When this thing would take over, he would speak very articulate and sophisticated. He also wouldn't say "I" when speaking about himself, he would say Gunther. So I tested this theory by asking it to prove that it was real and not just imagination gone wild or maybe split personalities. It told me a traumatic event I witnessed as a child that I damn sure didn't tell anyone because my mind tried to erase it. When it said this, I was filled with uncontrollable rage, and my other friends had to stop me from hitting him. All the while, this thing and my friend had a huge grin on its face. After I calmed down, I asked different questions, and it confirmed it was a demon lord. It told me how Gunther's step-grandma was using witchcraft, and about the cult at the church trying to open a portal. The only time I made it angry was when I was helping a friend, Tiffany, who had a negative entity attached to her. The demon was with us, and we had 2 candles lit. I started saying a prayer over Tiffany to get the evil spirit out. She was screaming in pain, and her back arched backwards in a sickening way. The demon lord was saying a chant under his breath the whole time, with his eyes completely closed. After the entity was out of her, I used the opportunity to move my hand and intention to my friend Gunther, who still had his eyes closed and kept saying the same prayer. His eyes shot open immediately, and the look he had was pure hatred. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't fuck with me," then grabbed both candles and blew them out simultaneously.
I have a lot of other stories about this demon lord and of other unrelated paranormal experiences, but this is the one that will always be the creepiest.